Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me. It's very strange running a webinar, but I can see that we do have attendees joining us. So welcome, you're in the right place this morning. It's the ECHO's end of project online event. We're just going to give, I can't see the clock when I'm showing my screen, so we'll give everyone another minute before we get cracking at presentations. So just bear with us. Thank you all for joining. Good morning again, everyone, if you've just joined us. We're just going to give another minute at the most, and then we will crack on because we have a lot to fit in. So welcome again, and bear with us while we just give everyone a chance to join. Okay, I think we'll crack on. Croeso I bawb, falcha liv goler. Welcome to everyone. This, as I've just said to those who had joined earlier, is our final outreach event for the ECHO's project. ECHO's is an Interreg Ireland Wales project, and we've been running since December 2019. And we actually finish up at the end of this month. And that kind of went very fast indeed, certainly for me. So I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Crona Hodges, and I've been project manager on ECHO's. And I'm joined today by quite a few of the project team from all over Ireland and Wales. And I will introduce them as we go along. We do have an agenda that you might have seen when you logged in, which I will take you through in a second, but just in case any of you are tweeters, the hashtag we're going to use is Echoes Live. I nearly said Twitchers, which I know we do have a few of them on the call. But if any of you want to tweet today's event, we are on hashtag Echoes Live. And something else I wanted to say here, I'm not sure. Oh yes, I wanted to point out that we are recording the event, but because it's a webinar, your videos won't be on. So if you do have questions, please use the Q&A button that you should be able to see at the top or the bottom of your screen. And my colleague Jyoti will be helping monitor that, and we will get to the questions at the end of each of the sessions. So structure-wise, we've split the 2 hours into 2 parts. The first part will be an overview of what we did over the last 3 years or so. And in the second part, we will talk about kind of what we found out and what we did about it. We do have a mixture of people giving live presentations and some videos. So bear with us, bear with me, whilst I try and flick through and get the right screen up at the right time. And yes, I think that's all I wanted to say before we got started. So bear with me whilst I get Peter Dennis has provided a video. He sends his apologies for today. Unfortunately, he can't join us, but he has provided a video. So I will actually stop sharing. Then you won't have to see me faffing about with all the technical things. So if I start sharing again, hopefully seamlessly you'll see Peter's video. Okay, I think that worked. So Peter Dennis from Aberystwyth University is actually our principal investigator on the project, and he's been managing 2 of the work packages. So he'll be giving an overview here of what we call Work Package 4, which is the work with the, particularly in this presentation, the wintering green and white-fronted geese. I should have mentioned we did have an an in-person event back in March in Aberystwyth, and one of the reasons for today really was that not everyone could make that event. So I'm glad to see that we do have quite a few folk from Ireland joining us. And that was one of the reasons we thought an online event nearer the very, very end of the project would be really useful. And also just to summarise what we did and what we found out, and to signpost folk to where they could go for more information once the project is finished. So without further ado, I'm actually going to reshare because I don't remember pressing the button that says share sound. There we go, that's better. Now it should work. Fingers crossed.
Hello. I've been asked to give a roundup of Work Package 4, which involved the field ecology and data creation to help with other work packages. The BTO team will talk about the bird catch, tag and tracking work, so I'll talk about some of the other aspects, including vegetation and work on the diet of the green and white-fronted geese. So Work Package 4 is quite a complicated work package, and you can see that there are different headings here. So we were at Aberystwyth University and working with colleagues elsewhere, focusing on collection of fecal samples from the geese to give us an idea of the dietary choices of plants, and that then allowed us to look in the field at the composition of the vegetation available to the geese when they visited in the winter and when they're feeding for that period. And because of that connection between understanding what they were eating, where they were eating it, we were then able to collect samples and look at the plant biochemistry. So I'll talk about the work that the team, including Sue Lister, completed as well. So the other work on curlew, there isn't time to cover, and the work on the actual tracking of the birds is dealt with by British Trust for Ornithology colleagues. So we carried out field work on the salt marsh and pastures of the Dovey Estuary, along the sort of coastal area of North Slob. This is the Wexford Wildfowl Reserve, where we have permission to also collect fecal material and dietary plants, and in the Kevney Valley on Ynysmore or Anglesey. So the general approach was to have selected days in the early, middle, late winter. This took place in the winters of 2020 to 21, 21 to 22, and the final season just completed 22 into 23. So the work was completed at all three of those locations and involved Gareth Thomas mainly watching the birds during the daytime to identify their feeding locations. And because of exclusion orders, we could commence fieldwork once the birds had flown back to their roost site. So typically we would see them or record them landing in the morning, foraging in some area, perhaps even flying between fields as well, but simplified here, just showing their sort of general grazing, foraging pattern through the day to a point at the end of the day when they might well have flown back to the roost site. So we had locations to visit in the evening for the purpose of collecting their poops. So we collected usually 24 individual poops from the breadth of the foraging area on a particular night. We would have 3 representative collections for each of the periods in the early, middle or late winter, and that accumulated up clearly to the various sites. And then those samples were frozen and then handed over really for Gemma Beattie, Andrew Detheridge and team to work on in terms of DNA extraction, and you'll hear more about that in detail in the second part of this online conference. But we also were able to collect plants, both clipping the lawn areas grazed by the geese, so that's a composition of different plant species in the grazing lawn, and then targeting plant species that are either recorded in the literature to be eaten by the geese, or they were observed by various experts to be included in the diet, usually from observations in the field. So we were able to compile a list and target certain plants as well. So you can see the list of those involved in collecting material and analysing material in the lab. And I showed at the end of project conference in the National Library a few weeks ago, trends that we found, such as, although there was not much difference in the sum of nitrogen in the material or the gross energy between sites and across years, there was a clear trend from the start of winter to the end of winter of a decline in nitrogen and therefore sort of protein, amino acids, or content of the material. So some aspects of the quality of the vegetation decline over the winter, implying birds would have to consume more to yield more of that particular nutrient when they're overwintering and to maintain muscle and condition. And also demonstrated differences in the plant species. There's not really time to dwell here other than to show you that some of the bents, the fescues and other species associated with salt marsh, but also common agricultural species, vary in their nitrogen, their acid digested fibre, so this is showing material that's less digestible, so the higher columns here are less desirable plants, the lower columns have a smaller proportion of less digestible material. This is the water-soluble carbohydrate, so again you can see some quite substantial variability between the plant species, but not a lot of difference in the overall energy. But of course that energy is not accessible if a lot of it's locked up in undigestible fibre compared with soluble carbohydrates. So we have to sort of look across these different measures over time. So just to finish, we can then link the dietary preferences of the green and white fronted goose to the botanical surveys in the fields. In other words, we can look at where the plants they choose to eat are most abundant, and then we can also do things, and working with Walter at University College Cork is an area where we can refine this work, is to look at things like the flood risk vulnerability of the locations where those food plants are found. And so here with the Natural Resources Wales overlay for the three categories of high risk, medium risk, low risk of coastal flooding, a high proportion of sites indicated by the more russet, richer, sort of red, rusty colour, those are the areas with more plants available that appear to be important in the diet of the wintering geese, and you can see that some are at a lower risk of coastal flooding from others. So there's a whole cluster here where it's at medium risk. So we hope to refine this approach for publications following the project and really follow up with that work later on. So these are some of the projected flood risk models, and so there are, depending on the resolution of models and other things, there are kind of more or less kind of risks to these feeding areas and of course to the agricultural value of those areas. So thank you very much for listening, and you'll hear more about the meta-barcoding work carried out by Gemma and Andrew later in this meeting. Thank you.
Well, many thanks to Peter for that presentation. I should just remind everybody, please do pop your questions in the Q&A box, and we will get to those at the end of the first session. Next up, we have Catherine Bowden from BTO. Hi, Catherine. And Catherine, just feel free to go ahead and share your screen, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Corona. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for attending. I'm going to talk to you today about the catching, tagging and tracking work that we've done within this project. And to start this off, I'm going to introduce you to our two study species. So the first is the Eurasian curlew. The largest wader in the UK and Ireland. Most people know that this is unfortunately quite at risk at the moment. It's red listed across the countries of Wales and Ireland in the UK, but Wales and Ireland still host a really good percentage of the flyway population. So this is the migratory population that goes up and down the East Atlantic coast, with at most in Ireland 4.4% and Wales has 1.9%. So this is a really important species to be able to understand what's going on with it, particularly in the face of climate change that this project's looking into. Talking about its population and the trends, at most in Wales, we see in the best estimates about 17,000 in the winter, and the Irish population in the winter is also over 28,000. But the long-term trends within our countries of Wales and Ireland are really quite dramatic. We have a 73% decline over the past 25 years in Wales of curlew, and 43% decline in curlew as well in Ireland, sort of showing quite, whilst they look widespread according to our maps, when we actually look at the change maps that we see in the trends, we can see quite how they are declining across our countries. And it's important to understand more about what's going on with these species. The dark lower dropping down arrows show us in the map quite how badly they've declined across Ireland as a whole and across Wales. And if we flip through the different trends, this is the United Kingdom going through to Wales, and the Irish trend from Birdwatch Ireland really shows us quite how they are declining across and making it an important species to understand what's going on across these two coastlines. We balance this with the green and white-fronted goose, which is one of the subspecies of the greater white-fronted goose that we find across Europe and the Palearctic. This is again, sadly, a red-listed species in Wales and the UK and amber-listed in Ireland. Again, trying to understand what's going on with this species is really important. And in particular, Ireland hosts a really good percentage of the flyway population. Over 53% in Ireland are seen, showing its importance within the flyway. And in Wales, whilst there's listed 0.2%, which looks a lot lower, doesn't mean it's any less important. As my following maps will show you, you can see how quite scarce this species is across the UK and Ireland. 40 individuals in Wales, mainly concentrated on the Dovey and on Anglesey. And the Irish population is around 8,000. Really fantastic number of species going on. The global trend is going down, as is Ireland, sort of in the past couple of years. On a short-term change, we've lost 10.7% across the globe and 14.5% in Ireland. And it's really focused in Ireland on this Wexford Slops. Over 60% of the Irish population, Peter mentioned this location. Looking at sort of one of the most recent maps on the wintering locations of green and white-fronted geese, we focus in on Ireland and Wales, you can see this huge number down in Wexford, near where we've done some of our work. And Wales has also got two populations, sort of on the Dovey and on Anglesey, though we will say the Anglesey population have moved location slightly around the island, as happens with species that are quite mobile. The trend in Britain and looking at the global population are both going down, though Wexford and Islay have got a little bit of stability. We are interested in finding out what's happening to them. So I've introduced the two species, but why these two species? We're looking at the coastlines around Ireland and Wales, as you can see in our little map in the corner that I've taken out from the Interreg logo. They both use coastal and near coastal habitats during winter. And between the two of them, we cover the estuarine, the coastal grasslands and the coastal wetlands. It's a wide swathe of the near coastal environment. So they've been chosen for their importance on these coastlines within the project area, but also for being able to allow us to understand what's going on. So for our predictions, we can work well with them. But why do we want tagging data? So birds do more than just move around during daylight hours. They do stuff in the nighttime, and tagging helps us see more about what they're doing when we can't observe them. Both these species are rather cryptic. They like to hide away hide away and make it harder for us to observe them. You might be able to see my bottom left photograph shows very faintly a Greenland white-fronted goose hiding behind some brambles. I was walking across a field hoping to be able to find them when I got a phone call from my colleague Rachel, who will be talking later, pointing out that I needed to stop because there was one in front of me. Couldn't see it until I peered through the brambles. Really cryptic species. And the tags allow us to quantify quite what they're doing. So statistically, we can understand the habitat preferences. And this takes us forward to understand scenarios of what they might be doing. So whether it's day or night, or whether it's high versus low tide, which particularly in the case of the curlew is being shown to be important. You'll find out later. So the tagging data allows us a lot more information than we can just gain through visual results, though visual observations are highly important as well. If any of you are interested, these are the tags that we're putting on. They're from the company PathTrack. They talk to base stations and give us relocations every 15 minutes with a good degree of accuracy as well. With the best number of satellites attached, we get down to less than 7 meters error, which is fantastic for me able to pick up the habitat. And we apply them through glue mounts on curlew, which fall off when the birds molt their new feathers through, and on collars for Greenland white-fronted geese. And whilst these have slightly different lengths of timings and how long they last, they give us fantastic battery life throughout the winter months, allowing us to really understand the small scale of movements and put them into our understanding of how they use habitats around our coastlines. But you might want to know a bit more about where we caught them. So we caught at 3 locations. We've got Ballyteague in Wexford, we've got Dovey Estuary in Ceredigion, and we've got the Kevney Valley and Southwest Anglesey. You can see these all showing up nicely. And this is what they look like. We caught them via several methods. On Anglesey and Ballyteague, we were able to use cannon netting. And you can see a net being set by my colleague Stephen Rachel on the left, which catches a nice little flock of birds as they're going through. And we also use mist netting on the Dovey Estuary, where we try and aim to target birds that are coming in to roost in the evening. Both methods allow us to pick up birds that are using the areas, which means that we can tag and recite them and see what's going on. A brief overview of what the curlew have been doing. The top left, I promise you there are some curlew in that picture. I mentioned they were cryptic. When we caught them, they get tagged, as you can see my colleagues in the middle doing, and then released soon afterwards out into the environment to give us data. We have lots of information coming back from them, but also we have the colour marks that we put on them, the rings, and that you can see in the bottom set of photographs that allow us to observe which ones are in the field, as well as getting the tagging data back. The green and white fronted geese were a little bit trickier, as we had a few more restrictions on us as to where they were. But I promise you again, there are some in the top left. The photograph to the right proved that my colleague was able to spot them. But the bottom left is my first view of them. Absolutely fantastic to spot them finally after working around the area of Anglesey looking for them in the first winter. And you can see the happiness of my colleague's face, Callum, as he's watching the goose being tagged to the right. Our totals of the number of birds we caught over the course of the 3 winters, we got 47 curlew. As you might imagine, we were slightly restricted by COVID and by avian influenza, but we were able to get 47 birds tagged, which gave us over 274,000 relocations of data to be able to use. And this is over just the core period of October to February, spread across the 3 areas of Anglesey, Dovey Estuary and the Ballyteague and Wexford. Our geese, we got 6 geese tagged, which was great. 3 in the first winter on Anglesey. As I mentioned, we had some restrictions, but actually from those first 3 birds, we discovered some of them were using colonsay. And so we managed to get some permission this year to put 3 extra tags out to understand more about how the interactions are going on between these and pick up on our birds that we've been following already. We got 24,000 locations from these guys. Fantastic array of data. And my colleagues will be talking to you more about these later on in the session. But before they get onto that, I would like to point out that colour rings are important too. Whilst the tags are on and giving us a fantastic array of data, the traditional idea of being able to observe birds through our colour rings is also important. So if you happen to be out and spot any of ours, and we've got 3 different schemes going on across Ireland in the bottom left, Dovey Estuary in the middle, and the North Wales scheme in the top right, please do report them in either to anyone on the Echoes project or through our BTO sightings. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that's given you a nice overview of what we've been up to, how we've caught the birds, and you'll find out a little bit more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm just struggling to turn my camera back on, but I am still here. Absolutely fantastic. Bit of a whistle-stop tour. So plenty has been done in the last 3 years, and I tasked Catherine with summarising it into about 10 minutes worth of work, which is a tall order. So thank you very much, Catherine, for that. I think it gives a really great overview and summary of the data set that we've had to work with. And as Catherine said, and Rachel will be talking more about what we've got to do with that on the project in part 2. So thank you very much, Catherine. We'll bring Catherine back in if any of the questions are relevant to her work on WP4. So next up, we have Walter Camaro from UCC over in Cork, Mare, and he'll be talking to us about his work on ECHO. So I'll let him take that away. Thanks, Walter. Oh, Walter, you're still on mute.
Okay, now I can. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to give you in this presentation an idea about the approach that we use to identify or to assess the vulnerability in the habitats where these species are coming in during the winter time. And in the second talk, in the second section, I'm going to give you some results to show you what we get from all the different analyses. Then, first of all, to give you a context about why it's important to map the habitats, where this is one of the aims of this project is to identify the different kind of dynamics of characteristics of these habitats, where these habitats are important for the species of analysis because are providing food, shelter, and these are mainly located in wetlands, floodplains, and boglands areas in both sides, in the ID side and in the well sides. We looking forward to implement an approach to identify or to assess the vulnerability of these habitats, linking those to features or to concepts, the exposure and the sensitivity, and based in these two part of the analysis, we try to assess or to score the level of vulnerability that this kind of habitat or species could have to different climate change stress or climate change hazards. Then in terms of exposure, we normally talk about the climate change itself, the hazard itself. The level of the exposure is linked to the level of the hazards is provided into the receptor. The receptors in this case are the habitats and the species. And we will talk about the sensitivity is the level of importance of the level of resistance of these species or habitats to react to these different hazards. Then to talk about the exposure and the relation with the receptor, we need to get information related to climate change. And this information is mainly provided for the different kind of meteorological offices. We get 2 offices in this case. For example, we get the Met Urian in Ireland and the Met Office in UK. This was the first kind of challenge to understand the different approaches or the different standards that we have into different countries. There was the first like kind of idea that we have of the first measures that we could send from this project is that is not easy when you have to analyze a phenomenal or a particular relations between species and habitats in similar areas, but that are belonging to different countries, because you could have the same condition of the areas, but the information in the sites or information in the areas are different. And when we're talking about decision maker, and when we're talking about to assess or to make front to the climate change, we need information. And from this, we realize that, for example, the information in Ireland is provided in a different way than the information in UK. We get information in UK to the website portal, and this information was provided open source for free. But in Ireland, the material is working in that direction, but right now that is not available. Then we have to go to the agency and to the project and to get information through the project. Then, and the other thing that we have is that we have different kind of spatial resolution of this information, temporal resolution. Then it's complex to work and to realize and to try to homogenize or to try to understand an area if we don't have the same level of information. This was the first like kind of message that we get from this analysis. Then in terms of climate change pressures, the first thing that we have to do is to understand how was the relation of the different climate change potential hazards with the species and with the habitats. To do this, we have to get some historical data sets and analyze and provide these data sets as inputs for the people that was working with the species distribution model and to the habitat mapping team that was working to generate habitat maps and to understand the dynamic of the habitats, to understand what of these kind of climate change pressures could affect these areas. Then for this project, we select 5 potential hazards that could affect the species or the habitats based in literature review and based in discussions with the different kind of experts. And after the analysis with the species distribution model, we realized that these species are mainly affected for the frost days and for the sea level rise. The sea level rise is not really directly affecting the species itself right now, but is affecting the potential habitats of interest of these species because, as Peter showed before in his presentations, is as in accordance to the projections, and some habitats or areas where the species are mainly present are going to be affected or are going to be flooded in the future. Then to understand how was the situation or how was the scenario in the future, we get some climate change projections based in different climate change scenarios. We try to focus the analysis in the LCP 8.5 scenario that is mainly linked to greenhouse gas emissions without any kind of mitigation action. And why we focus on this one? Well, because mainly all the information that we can get from UK from terms of projection was for this kind of a scenario for the frost days and for the sea level rise. For the IRIS sites, we get the climate change projections through the Translate project too, and through that different analysis generated under the Translate project. Then, in terms of assessment of exposure, in terms of exposure level, this is the data set that we get to the sea level rise. These are the different kind of scenarios that we get for the sea level rise. And that we get information for different percentiles. That means that we get information from different type of events. This in the slide is showing you the extreme events when the sea level anomaly is going to be more extreme in comparison to the average anomaly, to the average sea level. And the thing that we realize is that in some areas of UK, we could have levels or more than 1 meter or 1.5 meter of extra sea level in some areas or in some coastlines in both UK or on Ireland. In terms of sensitivity, then we have to focus our efforts in the receptors, in the species, in the habitats. In the case of the species, we get the information from the species distribution model. Then we get information that they provide to us based in the analysis that they get from the historical climate data sets. Then, as I mentioned to you before, we understand that most of the species are affected for the frost days. And we understand or we identify in what kind of habitat these species are more have the tendency to be present during the winter time. Then, based on this analysis and based on these outcomes, we decide to make some kind of scores or levels for the sensitivity that I will show you a little about that in the second presentation. Then for the habitats, we mapped some habitats over the areas of analysis. The idea was to understand the distribution of the habitats, and as I mentioned before, to understand what of these habitats were particularly important or relevant for the species during the presence of these species in the winter time, and to understand the dynamic of these habitats in time, to see if we can extract or analyze any kind of change of these habitats in time, and to see if we can identify potential areas where the species are present, and if these areas are have present change in the last 3 or 2 decades. And the other idea was to understand if these changes are related to climate or to human activities. Then, to get information to the habitats, we used the air observation based in remote sensing in satellite images. And the idea to use this kind of information is based in the fact that we don't disturb the species during the monitoring time, that we could access areas that are particularly hard to access in the field, and that we can have the seasonal monitoring of the different kind of vegetation or species. We use the Sentinel-2 constellation because this is an open source satellite images with a really good spatial resolution. This is having a 10-meter resolution, that we can get a really good distribution of the different habitats in the field. And as I mentioned to you before, we can have an idea of the condition of the vegetation in different periods of the year. Then with this, we can have a distribution or have an idea about how the habitats are distributed in the field. This is one of the images that we could get from the Sentinel-2. The left one is in the Dobie area in the west side, and the right one is in the Westford area. This is a particular area of interest for the geese during the winter time. We apply this habitat mapping approach. This based, as I mentioned, in Sentinel approaches, Sentinel-2 images. We subset this to the areas of analysis. We create some radiometrics index to identify and to map the vegetation behavior of the areas. We get some information in the field to understand what was the information of what the kind of the classes that we were generating based on the radiometrics index. And with a machine learning approach, we get some habitat maps. Then we get some kind of information in the field from the people that was tagging the birds that were working with the World Package 4. They collect information, as Peter mentioned to us before. And with that information and with the satellite images together, we can generate habitats to understand what's the current situation of the different maps in the field. In addition, we're monitoring the areas based with a similar approach to the one used to the maps, with the only difference that we have time series of or long time series of the satellite images. For this case, we use the Landsat one, that is Landsat missions that is having is covering have a covering for almost 3 decades. The same way we calculate or we identify radiometric index that could give us an information of the vegetation, and we apply a change detection algorithms to understand the dynamic or the change of this vegetation in the last 2 or 3 decades. These are the satellite missions that we use, the Landsat we use to monitoring the field and to create change in the field. And the Sentinel is that one that we use to giving us an idea of the current situation because it's having a better resolution than Landsat. This is the change detection algorithm. I'm not going to explain this in detail because it's really complex and this is not the idea, but it's just to give you a picture about how was the model that we developed. The model was including different kind of potential changes that we could identify. Those including changes that were linked to particular activities that are mainly linked to human activities. And other changes were linked more to the training, the vegetation, that they could be linked to another triggers, not directly linked to the human activities. Then we identify this based on the different change of habitats. Then finally, to understand how is the vulnerability that we get from this kind of inputs, we mix the exposure assessment that was based in the climate change hazard. We get some information from the species and the habitats to get an idea about the sensitivity to the species and the habitats to this climate hazard. We gave a score to both of them, and we mixed this score to get a vulnerability assessment and to understand how was the potential effects that the climate change hazards could have in the species and in the habitats. Some key findings that we get from this approach. The stability of these key habitats is essential to understand the relationship between the species and the natural environments. The air observation is an essential and useful tool for monitoring the habitats. There are large and inaccessible areas that could be reached during different moments with the air observation without disturbing the species. The air observations are useful tool, but they need the interdisciplinary approach. They need information from the field, they need information from the species distribution model, and they need the support and the work from all the other work package. I will give you some results and some like more interesting images in the second presentation. I was just using this time to give you an idea about how was the work approach that we create to understand the vulnerability effects in the different kind of habitats. Yeah, many thanks.
Thank you very much, Walter. I talked about tall orders earlier with Catherine, and Walter certainly had one of the tallest of orders in that he had to talk us through 2 work packages worth of work in the last 10 minutes or so. So Walter has probably been arguably one of the busiest people on the ECHOS project over the last 3 or so years, leading both work packages, the habitat mapping and the habitat vulnerability work. So I'm sure that gives a great overview of those 2 work packages. And as Walter says, in part 2, we'll see a little bit more about what's come from the result of that. So thanks very much, Walter. Looking forward to that. Next up, we are zooming over to Dublin, and we've got Reinald. So I think, Walter, if you stop sharing, if you stop sharing, Walter, then I think Reinald will be able to share with us. Oh, and Jyoti is speaking first. Yes, that's right. So Reinald's going to share the presentation. We may or may not see Reinald's video pop up, but hopefully he will. There you are, Reinald. Hiya.
Yeah, can you see the screen?
We can't see the screen yet. I can hear you though. There we are. It's coming. Brilliant. So Reinald will be driving the presentation, and the first half of the presentation it will be my colleague from GSD here, Jyoti, speaking. So thanks very much, Jyoti. Jyoti's leading the stakeholder engagement work package, and it's involved a lot of work with Compass over in Dublin, but I'm sure Jyoti will go on and explain all of that. Thanks, Jyoti.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. So in this session, we are going to talk about the stakeholder engagement aspect of the project as it relates to platform development, and how we went about gathering user requirements and how the platform was then developed. So my name is Jyoti. I'm from GeoSmart Decisions. So I've been leading on the stakeholder engagement activities within the ECHOS project. And then joining me is Reinald O'Donoghue from Compass Informatics, who's been leading on the platform development. So first of all, what is the ECHOS platform? So the platform is really it's a series of tools that have been developed as part of the project. So these are tools to support coastal land managers and policymakers to better understand the effects of climate change on their sites. So using Earth observation data, which my colleague Walter has spoken a little bit about, using climate projections, and then it has the ability also to incorporate other data sets. The platform also provides tools to help land managers to manage their sites, and that includes planning actions to mitigate against the effects of climate change. And then finally, the platform offers a way to visualize new data that has been generated by ECHOS research. Yeah, if you could. Thank you, Reinald. So as part of the project, we have, over the last sort of 3.5 years, we've carried out a range of stakeholder engagement activities, particularly with targeting sort of coastal communities close to our 3 main study sites. So the detail on this, a bit more detail on this is available on our website at echosproj.eu/stakeholders-engagement, or at that QR code. Today, of course, we're talking about the platform, and with regard to the platform, our key target groups in terms of stakeholders were landowners and site managers in coastal areas, policymakers, and then the conservation sector. Yeah, some of the key stakeholders that we engaged with as part of this process, you can see their logos here. So they range from sort of the local county councils up to national organisations such as Natural Resources Wales or the Environmental Protection Agency in Ireland. Yeah. And so how did we approach this? First of all, we reached out to site managers and policymakers, as I said, in coastal areas. And that was in sort of 2020 and early 2021. And then over the course of about 2 years, we held this in 2021 and 2022, we held a series of user requirement workshops with around 40 people from many of the stakeholder organizations I mentioned. The purpose of these workshops was to sort of introduce the idea behind the platform and some of the tools, but really to get feedback on what types of tools would be useful for the people, the stakeholders we were engaging with. So this, my colleague Reinald will go into a little bit more detail of sort of the feedback that came from these sessions. But that work was carried on until sort of late 2022, and then from sort of the middle to late part of last year, we began user testing with stakeholders. And finally, at the end of last year, we held a webinar at the end of November, which was attended by many of the stakeholders who we had been engaging with over the previous sort of 2.5 years. It was a great opportunity for us to be able to, many of you are here today as well, which is, it's good to see you here. But it was a great opportunity for us to be able to showcase sort of the ways in which we'd used the input. And, you know, we'd received very, very valued sort of feedback and inputs from stakeholders. So it was a way for us to be able to show how those inputs had been used. So around this time, we also produced promotional and how-to videos, which were produced in English and Welsh. You can view those videos at the QR code there. Yeah, and then I'll hand over to my colleague Rhino.
Yep, and thanks, Jyoti. So what I'll talk about a little bit about kind of how we got from the initial brief and from the stakeholder feedback to the final platform. So the brief, as Jyoti mentioned, was to build tools for land managers and policymakers to track and understand their sites and to make a more informed decision to manage actions for those sites. Through the stakeholder engagement, which was quite challenging through COVID. Most of it was online until the later stages of 2022. We did get some broad but common requirements that matched the project brief in addressing both the land management and the EO side of things. So on the land management side, you know, the platform was to allow land managers to add their sites and view them on a map-centric interface, to record data over time about those sites, and to build an understanding of their sites, to use real-time data to trigger alerts which can feed to on-the-ground activities and workflows, and to manage operational and administrative activities and to track the results and the feedback from those activities. And then on the other side of it was the EO and the spatial data visualization. So we want to be able to profile sites by combining EO and other data sets, including outputs from the other work packages, you know, with its bird tracking data, land classification, projections of habitats and species probability distributions. and all of these that would help a user to build their understanding of their site. So, would provide the tools and the data that, I can aggregate to make decisions about species or habitats. So I can answer questions, kind of, does a particular site meet some particular criteria, and to present the user with data that allows them to find other sites that match certain criteria. And really, our overarching aim, it was to build the tools and platform that not just for the Echoes project, but that could be general enough as an open source platform that it could be taken on and built on by others to answer their research questions. From kind of the stakeholder feedback, we created a requirements map, and this helped us to identify the functional pillars that we needed to build and develop at a high level, and how users would interact with the system from the point of logging in to to understanding their sites, and really building up that view and that ability to plan for their sites. This is a lot of detail on this. I'm not really going to go into it, but it's just to give an idea of, it was give an idea of, say, the process that we went through of how we broke down the requirements into sub-requirements, and kind of tried to understand the sort of data that we would need to address specific questions. If we needed kind of particular EO products, if we needed particular base maps, and then kind of how they turned into deliverables or particular pieces of functionality that we needed to build. So once we got through that, we kind of got into the development process. And I show this kind of to highlight, kind of the process of kind of developing, testing, showing to the stakeholders, getting feedback, and building on that again until we get to the end point, which we'll take a look at in the second half of the session today. So, initially we built a proof of concept from the requirements phase, how we interpret them. We built various components in order to confirm that, the ideas that we had could be developed into feasible solutions. And this involved components of the land management side, such as data-driven alerts, or prototyping EO techniques using Jupyter notebooks. So once we confirmed that we could actually build them, we would pull them together into a prototype, and it certainly wasn't the finished product. It was more a collection of bits of functionality, but it was moving towards a working system. The main advantage of this was that we could put it in front of stakeholders to prompt further discussion and get feedback, including other work packages. And many of these components were reusable within future stages, including the next step, which was the minimum viable product. It was the minimum functionality that would be usable. And again, it was very useful to gain further feedback. It was completed for the in-person session in Aberystwyth back in April of 2022, and allows us to show relevant data for our visit to Innishere. Here you can see us being educated by Rob O'Loughlin on some of the EO data that he had pulled together for Innishere. It was this version that was then used in further sessions with possible stakeholders, including the other work packages and the previously engaged stakeholders, such as, I think, NRW as well, who gave some very good feedback. And then it went into the pilot, where we gave access to a large number of people, pretty much anyone who we had had engagement with over the previous year. And we got some good feedback from that as well. And then finally, this led to the cloud-hosted version, which is available at echoesplatform.eu. And this hosted on AWS. We'll have a look at it later on today. Yeah, again, it's open to everyone to have a go of it if they have an account or not. And then, yeah, so there's just a few pictures of Innishere there. We're getting good feedback from the team out there. So in the next session, we'll look at some of the data, and I'll talk about the legacy of the platform and how someone might be able to take it on in future.
Fantastic. Many thanks, Rhinal. That was a great day over at Linesia, and that for anyone local would have spotted that was Dave Anning, this RSPB site manager, who's actually on one of our advisory board members as well, who hosted us that day, and it was fantastic, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And as Rhinal said, we will be showing you the platform in the second session and the functionality of that. So looking forward to that. Thank you in advance, Rhinal. So just a quick check of the time. There are no questions, which is absolutely fine. But I do propose that we have a 5-minute comfort break, if that's okay for everybody. And I will just leave a little slide up, and I'll meet you back here for 30:30 as scheduled. I'll leave this up and mute myself so you won't hear me making my cup of tea. So if that's okay with everybody, we'll see you back here at 30:30 in 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Okay, welcome back everybody. Hopefully that was just enough time to recharge your cups of tea. We are just about to start part 2 of our event. Just to remind you all, hopefully you can all see that. I think I'm sharing. We are starting with looking at what we did with the bird tracking data, and followed by what we did with the plant, the vegetation samples that were collected on site, and looking at the nutritional analysis of those. Then Walter will be back to show us the habitat vulnerability results, and then we'll have Rhino again at the end to see us out and talk about the Echoes platform. We will get started. I believe Rachel has already turned her video on. Hi Rachel, you're still muted, just so you know. But I was going to start with Paul's video, Rachel, but as soon as you're here, we can get cracking with you. I'll stop sharing.
Oh, don't change the order for me. That's fine. I was just getting prepared, so.
No, it's no different. Honestly, it was just I had it in my head to get his video up and running, but that's easier. You're here anyway, so I'll stop sharing, and hopefully you can start sharing, and then I'll mute and turn my video off and hand over to you.
Oh, I've just done something very exciting with my screen. Half a tick.
You'll monitor FAF.
Yes, apologies for the moment of faff. That's entirely my fault, because your screen actually just completely disappeared and threw me completely, but I think it's fine. So I've been challenged with 5 minutes on the subject of everything that we did after having put tags on birds and started collecting data back from them. So my starting point is the end of Catherine's talk. And again, it's going to be a little bit of a whistle stop. I'm going to go light on the scientific methodology. If you've got questions about that, please do drop us emails, and really focus on the interesting stuff. So we started with quite a lot of tracking data. So the analysis covers the first 36 curlew and the first 3 green and white-fronted geese, distributed between the 3 study sites of the project in Ireland and Wales. So more than 20,000 locations for curlew, and 15,500 locations for geese. And the obvious question here is, if we have all this real information, why can't we just look at that? Why do we have to spend months, in fact years, of analyst time analysing it? And there are 2 reasons. First of all, large data sets are absolutely great, but they're really difficult to wrap your head around. If you want to answer questions using them, you can't grasp the messages that the data are giving you just by looking at raw data. It's not possible. The second reason is that obviously tagging is difficult. Catherine's given you a flavour of that. It's expensive. We will never have real raw data for every part of a species' national or international range. So what we need to do is look for patterns that give us clues to the decisions the birds themselves are making, so we can make use of those real data sets where we don't have real data. And I'll show you an example. So the raw data, which are the pale dots in this image, that shows us where the birds were. And it gives us a feel for where the birds are spending their time. So this is a picture of the Dovey estuary, and you can see that the birds are using quite a lot of the southern side of the Dovey. They're using intertidal areas, they're using fields. But if we look for patterns in those data, that will tell us much more than just the location. They begin to show us how birds are making decisions about where to be. Those choices and what constrains their choices are the key to making tracking data from one site applicable somewhere else. If we can understand those choices, we can begin to predict them and take a step closer to understanding the consequences of future change everywhere. And to give you a feel for that, if we label these data with daytime, daylight, and nighttime, you can see that the birds are using very different places. They're found in different places at night from those they use in the day. And that's crucial because we've never been able to see them at night before. So our previous understanding of what these birds need was biased towards their daytime resources and didn't take into account what they were doing overnight. And we can look for other patterns as well. So there are lots and lots of patterns in biological data. One of the major drivers of habitat use in birds that use estuaries is, of course, the tide. So here you can see that at low tide, the white data points show the birds out in the river channel where they're feeding on invertebrates in sediment. But their legs, these are curlew data sets, their legs are only about 8 inches long. As the tide rises and the water gets deeper, the darker and darker blue data points show the birds using higher and higher land types. They move out of the channel onto the salt marshes and then finally over the seawall into grasslands that are protected from the highest water. And there are a lot of patterns to look for. This slide summarises some of those large-scale, non-biological patterns. So we've got daytime, nighttime, we've got tide height. Interestingly, we've also got moon illumination, lunar illumination. We know that some birds are active at night. We know that the amount of light available to them at night makes a difference to how they move around and what they do. And then we have a whole raft of spatial variables, including how far a site is from the coastline and how high it is, because both of those represent energy costs of utilising a place. The birds have to fly further or walk further to get to them. Having looked for all of these patterns and collected quite a lot of background information, we then come back to the tag data. And for every data point that's gone through a cleaning process, that's just to make sure that all the data are usable, we then tag the data point with all of these different variables. So in this example, we've assigned it to a habitat, we've got the location, we've added the information about date, time, day and night, what state of the tide, what state of the moon. And we can use habitat categories depending on what habitat information is available. In this project, we used Corine in both countries, and then we've done some more refined analysis using higher resolution data sets in Wales. And it produces a map, but the map is a probability of a bird selecting this habitat relative to how available that habitat is everywhere else. So this gives us quite a lot of information about how birds make decisions about where to go. And they produce maps of relative suitability for the species. So I'd like to have a look at some of those quickly. Oh, actually, starting point. This plot actually just expresses that birds are very choosy. It shows how non-random their habitat use actually is. So some habitats are much more important than others. The birds spend more time here than predicted by its extent in the landscape, and that would be salt marshes and estuaries. And interestingly, the gravel quarry at Ballyteague is very popular. And some habitats are actively avoided, or they're so common in the landscape that the birds are selective even within a habitat type, and that's a challenge for the future. So here we've got forest, we've got blue space, the sea and ocean habitats where certainly waders can't land, and some of the grassland habitats. And when we map these, then we're starting to look at predictive results. We can understand landscapes outside the study areas. Here we've predicted estuary habitat suitability for curlew around the whole coast of Wales. This is strikingly familiar because it looks like how we would expect wintering curlew to use Wales, but it's actually restricted to low tide and estuary habitats. So we need to think about what else they need. And in fact, if we plot their use of grasslands at high tide, suddenly the definition of a coastal wintering bird is extended an astonishing distance inland. So our land use decisions influence much more of a bird's world than we previously understood. And we can bring all of these different layers together and produce a much more refined map of a particular site at very high resolution. So these maps are very complicated, but we can see something about how the Anglesey study site looks to a curlew at high tide in daylight, and then how it changes when we look at the same landscape at high tide at night. So you can see, if I flick backwards and forwards between them, that there are hotspots of activity in daylight that actually disappear at night, places that the birds wouldn't go in the dark. The birds are tending to be further inland at high tide at night. Similarly for Ballyteague, look for the hotspots as I switch between these two displays that fade out overnight. And notice how the islands actually light up at night. So birds are actually using small nearshore islands overnight and much less likely to do that in the daytime. So what do all these pretty maps mean? You know, what's it useful for? Well, their primary purpose is for decision making. If we can see how a landscape looks for a conservation sensitive and disappearing bird species, we can make much more informed choices in our decisions when we change that landscape. If we need to build a seawall or choose a site to be left to be inundated as sea levels change, we can understand and perhaps mitigate the effects of habitat loss and change by looking at the landscape from the species perspective. We can also understand and maintain the connections between sea and land that clearly form such an important part of the support network that these birds need. Thank you very much for listening. On behalf of the entire BTO Cymru team, everybody has spent a huge amount of time on this and we've loved being part of the project.
Thanks very much, Rachel. Absolutely fantastic. I know that that was difficult because there's been loads of great work done with all the data and loads more amazingly beautiful pretty maps that we could have talked about today. I do have a question. I wonder, is it okay to ask you just now, Rachel?
Yeah, sure.
There, and we can still hear you. That's fantastic. It is, I just feel it's best to ask now before we get to the end of the session because it's specifically about the birdie work. So it's a question from Aidan Power. I don't understand it, so I hope I'm going to read this right. Has spent lead shot shown up in the areas being monitored or having any effects on the birds?
Thank you, Aidan. So we haven't looked for lead shot. It might be possible in future for stored fecal samples to be assessed for lead content, and certainly in almost all of the, well, all three study areas, but not all of all three study areas, are open to shooting activities at some times of the year. Of course, during the period of this project, we were also in the midst of the current avian flu outbreak, so that will have changed the distribution of shooting activity in ways that would make it not very comparable to previous years. So we haven't looked for it, but we might have samples that could be analysed for that in future. It wasn't a focus of the project.
Fantastic, thanks, Rachel. And again, if anybody has any more questions for Rachel or the rest of the BTO team, whilst we have them, please do pop that into the Q&A box and we'll come back to it at the end of part 2. Okay, thanks you, Rachel. Thank you, Rachel. Next up, we will show a video from Paul Holloway from UCC. Paul sends his apologies, he can't be with us here today, but he has kindly prepared a presentation for us. And this is where I have to do little button gymnastics and make sure that I press all the right things and we see Paul. And my sound is on. So thank you very much in advance, Paul.
In this work package, we have been aiming to utilise species distribution models to identify first the national distribution of Eurasian curlew, considering both Britain and Ireland, before exploring space and habitat use within estuaries to improve the precision required for supporting site-level conservation efforts. Our primary methodology was that of species distribution models, which are a powerful spatial ecological tool that combines a set of species observations with corresponding geospatial predictors, before utilizing a statistical model to understand and/or predict where these species are found, first in environmental space, before projection into geographic space. We used Korean land cover data, along with climate variables such as total precipitation and number of frost days, as explanatory variables to fit monthly distribution projections across the entire study area. Although 37 land cover classes featured in our models, the filter that we used, lasso regression, selected a small subset of these. Coastal habitats featured prominently, including estuaries, intertidal flats, salt marshes and port areas. The patterns observed were stable across the 3 Korean windows of 2006, 2012 and 2018, with February, and particularly February 2012, showing the greatest level of complexity, possibly corresponding to curlew preparing for their migration and exploring a wider range of land cover classes. So we successfully selected simple models to describe the observed variability in distributions of overwintering curlew. These birds evidently use a specific set of habitats throughout the winter, and the coastal habitats emerge as particularly important in these areas. Next, we wanted to refine our models by projecting the local distribution at the estuary level. At 3 specific study sites, we had collected high-quality bird tracking data through Work Package 4 and land cover classifications through Work Package 5. Here, we filtered the bird tracking data into our SDM framework, along with novel landscape metrics that represented the configuration of the landscape that included accounting for connectivity, fragmentation, and edge effects, which are all significant advancements over the state of the art in the discipline, which is percentage land cover. As can be seen in this slide, all 3 of these simple maps have the same percentage of land cover, which shows that this metric is perhaps insufficient to capture the underlying ecological processes that are occurring in vastly different spatial configurations of estuaries. We identified a diurnal pattern that shows that curlews utilize a range of habitats across both time periods, with larger areas of connected foraging habitat such as marsh, grassland, and mudflats required. We also identified a strong dependency on surrounding grassland, particularly in Ballyteague, as well as a preference to avoid built and woodland areas, particularly at night, more so than during the day, most likely due to the predation from mesopredators such as foxes, magpies, and crows. This research has shown that land cover and climate variables can drive curlew distributions across different scales, and that these relationships are nuanced, complex, and interlinked. And subsequently, any conservation efforts that are needed are going to be needed across the entire range to support this highly vulnerable species. More so, the use of novel approaches has uncovered hidden or unknown ecological processes, and this should also support conservation efforts. Thank you for listening, and our contact details are there.
Brilliant. Please do make a note of those contact details if you haven't already. Paul sends his apologies, as I think I mentioned earlier, and can't join us today, but do please get in touch with him about the fantastic species distribution modelling work that he's been doing with colleagues indeed from Aberystwyth University, Kim Knoby, who unfortunately can't join us today either, and Warren Reid, who is on the call. So if you do have any species distribution modelling questions, please do pop them in. And Warren, I may well call upon you. I now remember, Rachel, why I had thought we'd listen to Paul first, because I need to queue up Gemma's video. So if you bear with me for a few seconds, just like that, I will seamlessly start Gemma's presentation and hopefully press all the right buttons so that you can see and hear from Gemma next.
Hi all, my name is Gemma Beattie and I am a lecturer at Aberystwyth University, and I was part of the Work Package 4 team, and my job on the team was to carry out some molecular work. So the purpose of today's talk is to give you a hopefully very brief synopsis of the meta-barcoding work that we carried out, and this was done in order to determine the wintering diet of one of the ECHO's core target species, the Greenland white-fronted goose. So before I get going, I just want to give you a little bit of background about some of the genetics work so you understand what I'm on about. One of the key tools that we used was DNA barcodes. Now, these are a fairly recent thing within molecular ecology, and they were developed by a now Professor Paul Hebert, and his aim was to create a molecular taxonomic tool. So he came up with this idea of DNA barcodes, and what they are is just a very standardized short fragment of DNA, which you sequence with a known conserved region. And whenever you read off this sequence, this is effectively the barcode. And if you compare that with a known ascertainment set of things which have been barcoded, it will tell you what it is. There are different barcodes available for what you're wanting to identify, and for this study we used two very commonly used ones for plants, so RBCL and ITS2. The specific technique that we used was called meta barcoding. Now this is a very recent technique that has been developed, and it is used for determining the presence and diversity of species that are in environmental samples. So what I mean by environmental samples is that could be a scoop of water from the sea or from a lake, it could be a soil core sample, or it could be some fecal material. And you use metabarcoding to determine what species are kind of in there. Okay, so for our fecal material, what has this individual been eating on? Can we determine you know, all the different barcodes to have an idea of its diet. If you're interested in metabarcoding, there is this very excellent review that was published, and it takes you through all the considerations of the technique. But very simply, to carry out metabarcoding is that you get your environmental sample, so it could be a water sample or it could be a fecal sample. We extract the DNA from that. We then carry out a barcoding PCR. We then attach little adapters onto each of the samples that we're looking at. We send them away for high throughput sequencing. So this is where we get millions and millions of DNA sequences, which we then read through different bioinformatic pipelines, which blast us against known data sets. And then the end result is we basically have a nice list of the species that we've detected within our sample, and we also have an idea of the number of times that barcode was present, okay, during that reading process. Be careful with DNA metabarcoding and abundance. There's lots of different caveats because PCRs are competitive, but if you want to contact me afterwards, I'm happy to talk you through the pitfalls of it. The reason that we wanted to look at what the geese were eating is because this has been a major topic within the literature of this species. There has been discussion that the geese have changed their diet through time. They have moved from eating more bog species and salt marsh species and switching their diet to having a nibble around ryegrass pastures. And this has been noted in all the sites that they winter within the UK, so and Ireland, so in Wexford in the North Slavs, in Scotland and in Wales and in England, etc. So really our job was to determine what the geese are eating at these sites. The sites that we selected as part of Work Package 4 is in Ireland. We were able to collect fecal material from the North Slavs. This is obviously a really important site, a wintering site for the particular species. There are thousands of geese there. And we were also able to collect fecal material in Wales, both in Dovey and Kevney. Definitely not so many geese here compared to Wexford. So we had fantastic ornithologists. We had Gareth, we had Mick, and I'm going to count Pete in there as well, who were going out and monitoring where the geese were, so we could collect material from these Welsh sites as well. I want to thank our nocturnal ecologists who went out to these sites, obviously stuck to the rules, stayed away from the geese, they weren't disturbed, put on their head torches and sought out goose poo. It must have been a thrilling experience. And they really did an excellent job making sure that everything was well labelled and was sampled to the correct protocol that we had developed. We also wanted to get some resolution to our collections of the fecal material because we wanted to understand if there was any seasonal shifts in the wintering diet of the geese. So we collected material in the early winter over a few days when the geese had just arrived, in the midwinter, and also in the late winter before they were about to fly off. And we have got collections from two different field seasons, so from 2021 and 21 to 22. I'm going to have to apologise, this keeps happening, so I'm going to just escape from this, or I will stop sharing for a minute and move on to the next slide. Sorry about this, doing this on my laptop and it's a bit rubbish, so I will share again. And we will get back to it. Right, so the molecular work that we carried out, it was a two-step metabarcoding process. So we did our extractions in a clean lab. We did our barcoding PCRs with RBCL and ITS2, again in the clean lab. We attached on our adapters with another PCR, again in a clean lab. We cleaned up those PCRs. We sent them to Cardiff for screening on a MySeq. This is our next generation sequencing platform to get our millions of sequences. And then we create a bioinformatics pipeline to determine the different barcodes that were present and then to pull out each of the samples individually. And I'm going to briefly discuss the results that we got. So here we have a list of the top plant species that were detected within the fecal samples that were collected at the Dovey. We can see here lots of different grasses, our lolium, our poas, etc. And we also have the presence of some species that will be in that kind of sward. So we have our ranunculus, our trifoliums, clovers. This is our list of species that were detected within the Wexford samples. So lolium, again, it was number 1, same as we've seen in the Dovey. Again, we have lots more grass species. And interestingly, within Wexford, I was really pleased, we actually detected some beak, which Dominic, who's the conservation officer there, told me that this is what they actually planned out for the geese. They harrow over the field and the geese have a little nibble on it. So we did detect it, and we detected it within our early samples. Supposedly that's whenever they come out for them. So that was nice. And then here we have our Kevney results. So again, lolium number 1, different grass species, and a few different kind of species that will be within that kind of sward. Those results are kind of hinting to us that yes, ryegrass pastures must be a favourite of our species. What we did is that we put all our data together, all the different species, across the seasons, across the period in the winter, across the sampling days, and we carried out, these were our different factors that we popped into a Permanova analysis. And I just wanted to show you briefly some results. So these are from the ITS barcodes for 2021. And we can see here we have our early season. So we have Dovey, which is in the little red dots. We have Wexford, which are green dots. And we have Kevney, which are blue dots. And for this early season, we can see that the Dovey and the Wexford sites showed a significant difference. And then for the midwinter, we can see here that the Dovey was significantly different from both the Wexford and the Kevney sites. I'm sorry, my screen has frozen again, 2 seconds. There we go. I will start sharing again. There we go. Sorry about that. And then in the late winter, we can see that we didn't actually have any Kevley samples for this particular field year. So we can see that there was a significant difference between the Dovey and the Wexford, the different plants that they were feeding on. Now, again. Okay. Sorry about this. Right, what we do have, and obviously time is running out here, is that we have a breakdown for each of these sites from early, mid and late season, and the top 4 plant species that were kind of detected across those sampling days. I'm just going to show the Dovey just because of time. So what I find really interesting though is just a little point to note is in the late season, we actually started detecting saltmarsh species that the geese started foraging on within the Dovey area. So if you're interested in these breakdowns, then please ping me an email and I can share the data with you guys with that. We have got the nutritional we have got some data on the nutritional analysis that we carried out. So at each of the sampling sites, we did a field survey and then collected representative material from the different species that were present and have worked out different values. So Peter's working on that at the minute, so you can contact him about either the nutritional analysis or those field survey data. And then finally for me, it's a huge big thank you to everyone involved. I don't have time to list them. Thank you for listening, and any questions on any of this research, there's my email. Please ping me a little message. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks very much, Gemma, for making that recording for us. Gemma had hoped to join us today. Unfortunately, her Wi-Fi, wherever she is at the moment, is unreliable. But thanks for sending that through, Gemma. I will say this at the end as well, probably, but the recording of today's event will be up on the website. So if you want to go back and revisit any of the presentations, or if you know of a colleague who would have enjoyed it and couldn't make it today, please do flag that to them. Next up, because time is flying, we're going to go back to Orc, and Walter is going to share his presentation with us once you get a chance, Walter, and don't forget to unmute. Thanks. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Yeah, for this presentation, idea would be to show you some results from all the process, from that all the process I was describing before in the approaches description part. And then, as we ended before, I was mentioned that our approach was to try to link the exposure and the sensitivity of these habitats and species that we were analyzing to understand or to make an assessment of the vulnerability. Then, as I mentioned before, in terms of exposure, we have receptors that are being affected for climate hazards, so for climate pressures. And then to understand how these receptors were distributed or how was the dynamic with this receptor, in the field, we have different kind of approaches. We have the species distribution model to understand the species present or absent in the areas. We have the tag information to understand what are the areas that the habitats, the species prefer to be present in the time that they are in the fields. And we have the habitats that give us an idea about, give us a name or an idea about what kind of areas these species are visiting. Then, in terms of the habitat, as I mentioned before, the habitat map cover mapping was one of the objectives of the aims of this process, and the idea was to give us an idea of the distribution of the different species or the different habitats in the field. We use the air observation approach. We calculate different kind of radiometric indices, and with the field data sets, we generate through a machine learning approach these habitat mappings with these different kind of habitat classes that were identified as key habitats for the different species. This is an example of the vegetation index that we generate through the process. This is the NDVI for the Dobby area. As you can see, there are different kind of levels of green for different periods of the year. This gives us an idea that the vegetation have changed during the year, and that in the same case, you see that there are different kind of green scales distributing the spatial. Then this means that there are areas where the vegetation have a different behavior or is a different condition in comparison to other areas. Then with all of this information, we fill the model and we get an idea about what the difference of the different classes that we can find in the field. This is an example of the habitats that we can get in the field. This is the Baltic area where we can find mainly improved grasslands areas or land cover over the sites. We can see that there are some like sandbanks or salt marsh in the coastal areas, and we can see that there are some woodlands in the area too. Then we have the Westford area that have a similar distribution as the Baltic area, and there is mainly grassland or improved grassland over in the field. And these are particular areas, as my colleagues present before, that are for the interest of the different kind of species. Then we have the Dobby area that is one of the really particular areas because the distribution of the habitats is particularly different in comparison with the other areas. And some of the interesting things that we realize with all the observation of the different species of the presence of the birds in the field is that in this particular area, the birds are particularly interested into the estuary area instead to be spread over the grassland or over the vegetation or the inland areas. That is different from the other areas of analysis. And this is the area of Kevney that is in the north side of the Wales area that we study. These have a particular distribution. It's not only grassland like in the Westford or Baltic area. We have more woodland over this area, and we have mudflat and lower and upper salt marsh in some particular areas in the estuary or in the coastline. Regarding the habitat monitoring process, as I mentioned before, the idea was to map in the current situation to give an idea about the distribution and to understand how was the relation using the tags of the birds and the present or absent of the birds in the field to understand what was the situation of these birds. But the other idea was to identify, to see if we could identify change in the field related to any kind of trigger or any kind of particular trigger linked maybe to human activities or to any additional trigger that could be linked to the climate change. Then we based in Landsat constellations time series, we identified and we developed this monitoring change detection algorithm approach. And then we identify some change in the different kind of areas based in our change detection algorithm. Then this is an example of the type of change that we identified. This is the Kevney area. Then as you can see, we identified change between the 2018 and the 2022 over this area. For example, this means that in this area that tends to be a woodland, there is an increase, a particular increase in the width, in the greenness of the vegetation. And this could be linked to any kind of climate change approach. One of the things that we realized with this change detection monitoring change detection algorithm was that mainly the areas that we can identify or we realize that we can information that we can collect is that change linked to human activities. Then all these black areas that you can see in the right image are areas where we identified that there were change presented linked to human activities. The other thing that we realized or we identified, or the other approach that we have with these mapping activities was to identify, as I mentioned before, how the species were linked to the habitats. In both of these images, you can see the black dots that are like the presence or absence of different kind of species in the field. Then with this, we can make a relationship between the habitat that we, the habitat mapping that we develop with the presence or absence of the different species. And with this, we can realize what are the habitats that are more important to the species. This is key information to support the sensitivity approach that we use to develop the vulnerability assessment. This is another area. This is the W area, as I mentioned to you before. And as you can see in the Rachel presentation before, the species here are more focused in the estuary area more than the inland areas. And this will be probably related to the different distribution of the habitats in this area. Then for the sensitivity assessment, as I mentioned to you before, the key is to see the relationship between the species and the habitats and how this habitat or species could be affected for the climate change hazard or stress. Then to do this, we found a couple of approaches. We use the habitat information, and monitor the habitat change in the areas, and we use the species distribution model to see if there was a potential climate hazard that was affecting the species, the presence or absence of these species, and then we use the hazard of the climate change hazards. Then we use, for example, the sea level rise. In this case, for the sea level rise, a part of the habitat distribution, we have to use the digital elevation model to identify how was the level of the sea level rise could impact the different kind of habitats. This is an example of the projection of the sea level rise based in the last, in the worst case scenario for different periods for different moments of the analysis. Then we have the potential sea level rise in the worst case scenario for the for the end of the century. And as you can see, this could be affected, could affect a big part of the estuary where we observed before that the species are present. Then in terms of the sensitivity assessment, we use the analysis generated over the species distribution model to identify the areas of the potential habitats where the species have more presence or have a higher relationship. Based on this, we give a score to this kind of habitats based in the presence or the potential presence of this kind of a species, and we highlight the level of the score of the sensitivity, a part of the analysis based on the species distribution model, with information collected by the tags in the field. Then all of those red points that you see are areas where we realize with the species distribution model that are more like attractive for the species in the winter time. And all of the red points are the areas when we observe that there was a presence of the species during the winter time from the tag data sets. Then this information integrated with the exposure assessment is this kind of shadow that you can see here is the sea level rise assessment that we observe for the end of the century. Will generate a vulnerability assessment. Then with this we can observe was of these areas with the really high sensitivity analysis will be affected for the exposure. And as you have been seeing before in the other presentations, there are estuary areas that are being affected, that are essential for the presence, or for the birds, or for the feeding of the different birds during the winter time. This is the Politic area that could be affected for the sea level rise in the worst case scenario. In the same way, you can see that there are several areas that are being where we have been observing the presence of the birds that could be affected for the sea level rise. And finally, some key findings that we find during this whole process: that an interdisciplinary approach is essential to understand the dynamic of the challenge of the climate change. One of the biggest challenges of the vulnerability assessment is having to be working in 2 different countries. The integration of the data sets have been really hard. We have different spatial resolution. We have different approach from the data sources to provide the data sets. And on the other side, it's important to have more initiatives to integrate this kind of information, this kind of data sets that are having different standards. It will be important is if all of this kind of projects leads to an standardization of the information provided for the different for the different regions of different countries. As I mentioned before, in the whales, the species doesn't know anything about borders or about approaches or about governance or about policy. They are more interested in the fields or in the distribution of the habitats. Then if we want to understand how is the behavior of this species, we really need to homogenize the information over the different kind of areas. Then thank you very much to all of you for your attention, and thank you to my colleagues, to Dr. Fiona Cole for supporting the habitat mapping here in ECC, and for Cathal Mahoney to the support in the climate analysis in the Murray Center.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Walter. And I guess I'd just like to reiterate Walter's final point, which I think is a brilliant one, is the importance to keep collaborative relationships like what we've developed throughout this project open and alive. And if we want to manage the Irish Sea effectively for these kind of species, the Irish Sea areas and habitats along it, then we need to be learning from each other and working out ways to work better with the data sets that are available. So I think that's a really key message that's come from this project. So thanks for pointing that out, Walter. I'm conscious of time, so Ryan, I'm sorry, you're going to be under a little bit of pressure to give your talk over 10 minutes or so, but I will hand over to you without further ado.
Thank you, Crona. Yeah, you've got us on a tight schedule today, so I'll give a whistle-stop tour of the platform and then talk about how it can be taken on and the legacy of the platform. Really, it's going to be a skim at this stage of the platform. So the URL is there. There's a link on the ECHO's website, so I'd encourage everyone to go and have a go of it. It's been 45 minutes, so a quick recap of the requirements from the earlier presentation. What we're looking to do is to map sites, to profile our locations, to trigger alerts, to take action, and to plan for change, to combine analysis of historic data with models and future predictions to manage risk. For example, changes in water level, flooding, etc., and how that impacts on our sites. I will skim straight into a demo. I had some screenshots there, but in case we have issues, but I'll actually just go straight into a demo. So, kind of, you don't need an account to log in. You can just log in as a guest and you'll get a limited set of functionality around, kind of what sites have been created and the data layers and the mapping and the Earth observation layers that are available. There's more functionality as a user who is set up. The instance that we're looking at here, it's hosted on AWS. It should be super fast. It'll be hosted there until the end of the project. If I go to one of the sites, we'll look at the site or the land management side that we mentioned earlier. And, again, it's important to reiterate that our aim here is to build something that can be used within ECHO's project context, but also, is general enough to be a base platform that can be taken on through other research projects. Although obviously, what we've built here is being, flavored by the research outputs of the ECHO's project. And as such, the functional pillars have been built and can then be expanded by others. So, here's a site that's being created around Ballyteague that Walter has mentioned. There's a certain number of data points that you have for a site. It's kind of limited at the minute, but it gives a flavor for the data types that can be associated with a site. You can have a number of sub-sites. There's smaller parcels within my site that I want to track separately. Possibly, if as a farmer, it could be a field. As a land manager, it could be an area that has a specific management plan or specific flora fauna. You have workflows at its simplest level. Workflows, they're a set of steps that that I have to carry out for a specific task related to my site or sub-site. They can be actions to take in the field. They can be administrative. Steps can be assigned to people and be time bound, and users can record feedback on them, which then on the individual steps in a workflow, which feeds back and understanding the impact when you combine it with those observation data, the impact of those workflows, are those steps or those actions on my site. You have alerts. These are data-driven alerts, and what we're looking at here are weather alerts, and they allow me to be notified of specific conditions. They can be extended to any data source. As long as you have a data feed, you can get notifications of particular events driven by those data feeds. So, for example, if I had an appropriate source of tide data and a feed of observation data from a citizen science app, you could be alerted to events from those. And then you just have attachments that can be associated with a site. They can be, videos, documents, survey data, anything like that. So you have documents there. I'll pop over to the map view, because for me this is where the real strength of the platform is. As mentioned earlier, when I create a site, there's a scheduled processing that runs.
You're back. Sorry, you dropped out there a second, Reinhold.
Oh, how long ago did I go?
5 seconds.
All right. I don't need to go back really, do I?
No. Sorry, everyone. Thanks, Reinhold. Okay.
Sorry about that. So yeah, when I create a site, when I digitize a site, we have processing that runs that go and produces satellite imagery as far back as it's available. So the Landsat data that Walter showed us the chart there, back to I think 1985, but also we'll then go and create that data for going forward on an IP basis as soon as new satellite imagery becomes available. And so it's combining the satellite data that's created with historic or ground observations. It allows us to, as a research user, to understand what's going on with the site. So what we have in terms of Earth observation data for these, so kind of this is Innis here, so it has been digitized. We have data on habitats or species or on climate. We'll quickly look at the Earth observation. We have kind of single daily products, which are kind of like NDWI, so the water indices, or NDVI, and again they're created every time there's a pass of the satellite data. These can be quite heavily, and there's a time slider on them. The problem with the daily products are that they're heavily affected by cloud, like you see here. So what's possibly more useful are these monthly composites, whereby all the cloud-free images. Oh, well, there you go. All the cloud-free images from a month are brought together and generally give a more cloud-free view over time of what's going on with a particular product. So in this case, it's NDVI. It's a vegetation index, and it's a way of quantifying how green or how much vegetation is in a particular area. Over on this side, we've got your regular map tools. We're looking at a time series. So say NDVI here, or NDMI goes back to 1984, where it's Lancet. What you can do is over time, so I'll change my my base map there, and over time I can compare how the NDMI has changed. So if I go and I'll get kind of back all over time, we can see a particular month that's cloud free, and then here, so you can see then, kind of what the value was for this over time and how it's changed. Obviously it's seasonal as well, given we're looking at monthly composites there. And then there's a simple change detection. In this case, just visual. I think what Walter showed us is probably more accurate on these sites. So, kind of we're heavily pixelated old imagery here, so it shows a huge amount of change. So that's not that accurate with the older products. What I might show is some of the data layers that were provided by the other work packages within the project. So if I go, because I really think this is where we see the power of the platform, where you can combine, say, the research outputs of some work packages and say tracking data, and with the Earth observation data, and to gain a better understanding of why you're seeing certain behaviors or certain habitats. So if I show here, we have the outputs from for Ballyteague. So that's the site that we looked at earlier. And if I look at some of the classification maps that that Walter produced, so that should look familiar at this stage. And I'll just make that a little more opaque so we can see what the underlying is. And then if we combine it, say, with the species data that we have, the Curlew survey data from Ballyteague, and we have the data points that have been collected, and then we can view them over time. We could possibly see where they are spending time, and then when we have an understanding of what the land classification is, we can get a better understanding without actually having to do site visits of what's going on in particular fields. Again, it's useful to see in combination with, say, some of the moisture indices, or the I'll just move this guy down to the back so we can see what's going on there. So seeing in combination with, say, some of the moisture indices to understand why they're spending time in particular areas. I might then pop over to, we have some field survey data. I'll just remove all these. We have some good field survey data that Peter talked about earlier on up from Anglesey. So again, if I turn on its thread, and we can look at the field survey data for, I think there's 2 data sets that we have here, and again we have validation of the habitat data and the land classification from Walter. And again, we can see how the results of the data, but also the validation of these of the classification maps that we have. And then finally, because I think we're about to run over, one final interesting data set that we have here, again from the survey data, was the goose data. The way that data was collected it lent itself differently to a different visualization, whereas what we have actually here are counts of observations within 1 square kilometer blocks. So you can get an indication of where the species were spending time over in day or at night. So, you know, here you have 428 counts, so incidents of a tag being detected in that square at night time, whereas in other areas it's much lower. And then again, you know, kind of your daily one where you can map it and see where they're moving over time. And then combining that again with some of the other Earth observation products, like your water indices, you get an indication as to why they're spending time in a particular area. Finally, just a little bit on the legacy, if I may. Frona, do you want me to stop?
I don't want you to stop. I definitely want you to talk about legacy. That would be great.
Okay.
Sorry to everyone, but we will be going over a few minutes, but please bear with. I think it's really worthwhile.
So you know, kind of to, I guess, to a big part of the platform is the legacy of it, and you know, kind of one of our key aims is that it will be used in future, you know, that we can allow others to take it on, and so we're doing as much as we can now to promote that. And I guess there's a few parts to it, and one of it is understanding platform. So, you know, as mentioned earlier, there's a load of resources out there in terms of videos. And if you have a look at the Echoes project channel, there's a huge amount of information there, both from some of the previous sessions that we've had, but then also we have a lot of how-to videos and videos of the platform. So the overview, the demonstrations, and the explainer videos that are there as well. You know, then the next part is to understand the solution. There's extensive documentation going up on GitHub. If I just quickly open it up, this will be an open repository. The platform, so I'll just show you what some of the repositories are. You've got the platform repo, which gives, you know, technical information, and, you know, kind of the requirements to support and install, the prerequisites, how to set it up, how to deploy it, and how to run it. All the source code required will be available. You've got documentation repositories that cover both the Earth observation side and the complexity around setting that up, but also why and how it works. Where things were prototyped, we have Jupyter notebooks that are up there. These will be things maybe that didn't make it into the platform, or just once-off scripts that needed to be run. For people taking it on, we've created a number of architecture options. So there's architecture diagrams. We'll have full deployment scripts up there to make it easier for anyone to deploy it. In terms of the data that's been used, we have a full data catalog of all the layers that are available on the platform. And then similarly, we'll be putting up outputs from a number of work packages and the data that we have here up onto the UCC ArcGIS online instance, and so the project will live on there. And then, yeah, I guess finally, it's our preference and our hope that the platform will be used and taken on again. We're talking and we're actively discussing to see if there's a follow-up project that can take it on, and I guess more of that even when it happens. And then just finally, just thanks to all the other work packages who gave us data, and indeed to the stakeholders who gave their time and their feedback, and to everyone in Compass who worked on the platform over the last couple of years.
Thank you very much, Reinald. And that's a wrap. I've been trying to squish 3.5 years of work into 2 hours was quite the challenge. So obviously we couldn't share everything that we've been able to achieve over the 3.5 years in this one event. Please make a note of the website. All of those YouTube links and GitHub links that Reinhold showed there will be up there on the website as well. And I guess it's just left for me to say thank you very much, especially to the panelists and those who contributed to today's event. I could say many more thank yous. Rachel, did you want to say? Oh, everyone's popping up. Great. Okay. We can all join in the final wave at the end. Always feels like a bit of an anticlimax at the end of these kind of projects. But as Reinhold said, we hope that we have developed something that will go on, live on, and be used in future projects. As he mentioned, we are looking at other funding opportunities to perhaps find a follow-on project and literally build on the development work that's been done and find some new applications and get some more exciting data. So just a very quick thank you from me to the whole of the ECHOS team, to Sue Pester and Pete Botwood, who helped pull the proposal together, and everyone else who was involved in that many, many years ago, and to Karen Preskin and Reece Hale over at Aberystwyth University, who've kept me in line and helped me with all this project management work. To everyone on programme board, chaired by Professor Neil Glasser at Aberystwyth University, thank you for all your support, and also to the advisory board members, some of whom were able to join us today. Thank you for all your support throughout the whole project. And as I say, please stay in touch. We've developed some great working relationships over the last 3.5 years, and as I mentioned before, we will seek to continue to keep those alive and kicking, and keep doing some great work with these kind of data sets and these kind of tools. So thank you again, everyone. Have a great rest of the day. Bye.